Or if you have a nasty rash, keeping you up at night. Don't worry about a thing.
Don't worry.
'Cause Atticus Health will make you feel alright.
I'm Ilana Razbash, and this is Radio Architecture.
Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live on Radio Karam from the ancient Karam Karam swamp that has been fished on, cultivated, explored, and loved and cared for by the traditional custodians since time immemorial. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. As always, thank you for joining us for another broadcast of Radio Architecture. You can text us in the studio on 0493 213 831. We'd love to have you with us. And apologies to any listeners who might be experiencing some technical difficulties at the moment. We're waving to you on YouTube. We can see you there right now that you're with us. We hope the live stream is up and going. And if you're going to catch up on this conversation on podcast, welcome back as well. And thank you for tuning in. My guest and conversation partner this evening is Noe Harsel. She is a writer, podcaster, arts producer, and executive leader whose work spans cultural storytelling, community engagement, and strategic leadership. She is currently Senior Policy Advisor at the Australian Centre for Jewish Civilization, Monash University, and is most recently Museum Director and CEO of the Jewish Museum of Australia, where she created impactful exhibitions and programs that connected diverse audiences and fostered dialogue around identity, culture, and history. Noe is the creator and host of Why Write, a podcast exploring the motivations behind the written word, and Live Write, a globally attended online writing space supporting creative expression. Her podcast, Like Us, produced in partnership with SBS, explored conversations around race, identity, and culture. She has written for publications including Melbourne Magazine, Broadsheet, and AFL Magazine on topics ranging from architecture to art and cultural studies. Formerly chair of Writers Victoria, Noe has held numerous board and advisory roles across arts, literature, and social justice sectors, including work with local and state governments. Born in the US and raised in Melbourne, her Japanese, Jewish, Polish, and Russian heritage deeply informs her work. With an architecture degree and a Master of Arts in History, she has also lectured in Australian history, cultural studies, and architecture, and advocated for inclusivity and multiculturalism in the arts. Driven by a commitment to creative connection and cultural dialogue, Noe champions diverse voices across writing, arts, and public life. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so thrilled to have you on.
It's been a while in the making. I mean, it's taken us a while to get here, but worth every second. So thank you. And thanks for the introduction.
Thank you so much. And worth the wait, but also I feel so lucky because this must be your first radio interview since starting your new role.
You know, it really is. I only started a couple of days ago. So I'm very fresh in the new role. Don't ask me any super deep questions about it. But I am excited to be able to talk about all the things. You talk about so many interesting topics and conversational pieces. So I'm sure we'll be able to make it all work.
We have so much in common and so many threads there.
There are so many things to talk about. I mean, as you know, I started off with architecture, but then moved on this crazy amorphic little journey around, which is landing me right back here in your lap, down here in beautiful Karam.
Let's go from the beginning then.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You're a listener of the program, so I know you do know what my first question is, but I'm going to ask it anyway. It's, what's your earliest memory of a building or place?
You know, you say I know this question, and I do because I have listened to your beautiful podcast, and I love, love, love this question. And even though I know the question and I wanted to totally, I'm a swat up for it because I'm that kind of personality and I like to be top of my class, I couldn't quite get it together about what is my earliest, I guess, memory of the architectural space, but it's more of an evocative feeling. And I've got a couple of them.
Oh, please, I'm ready.
I'm sorry. Okay, but they're interestingly connected. One's from my Bobby, which is my father's mother, so my grandmother. And one's actually from my Oba-chan, which is my mother's mother, so my Japanese grandmother. And it's interesting how they just came to me and I couldn't remove it and actually go into the spaces so much. So my Bobby, my grandmother, she's an immigrant from Vilnius. So, she left in the pogroms from Lithuania. She escaped to the US. It was like it was before World War II. So it was like the 1920-ish times. And she found herself in Chicago. So the memory I have though is of she grew up, or she found herself in the slums of Chicago on the South Side. And then, as you probably well know, the ordinance in Chicago, they kind of were like, get these people out of the Chicago municipality. You know what we're going to do for the Jewish immigrants? We're going to build them their own suburb. And they called that suburb Skokie.
Really?
Yeah.
I actually didn't know this story.
Yeah. So, I don't know if they overtly call it that way, but if you read through a lot of the documentation, it really was a suburb that was created to alleviate the pressures of the slums and alleviate the problem of the Jewish problem within the city of Chicago. And they encouraged the population to move to Skokie. And my grandparents were one of those people. They had a furniture store in the city and they had a furniture store in Skokie. And I have a memory of my grandparents' house in Skopje. Well, I didn't know my grandfather, but my grandmother. And in that memory, and again, I will totally accept the fact that this is not true and is influenced by Anna Green Gables, but there is a sloping hill that goes down to a weeping willow. And I remember this weeping willow tree. And that is one of my earliest memories. I remember going down to that weeping willow tree, probably after my Bobby has yelled at me for some transgression. I remember I was there in the Midwest until I was about 4 or 5 years old, and then we moved to the West Coast. So it's a super early memory. She was a woman who had this big, loud, I have come to hear slightly unpleasant personality. And her house, her furniture was covered in plastic. I would help her make chopped liver. She had these huge brothers. I remember my great uncles being incredibly tall. And then I remember escaping down to this weeping willow tree. Is it true? My dad's not so sure, but I'm convinced that it exists.
But either way, for you, it's real.
It's for real for me. You're right. You're absolutely
and
right.
it was massive and lopping over.
Drooping. I have this, there's obviously a bubbling brook. Now that I'm probably not so sure. But it means, for some reason to me, it's whenever I think of Bobby, whenever I think of that period of my time, there is this weeping willow tree in the front yard. And there's something about it that's so nostalgic and feels so comforting, feels like the quintessential suburban dream of safety, of security, of that family around you, of something that feels like prosperity without it, feeling like wealth, if you know what I mean, about that family sense of togetherness, about what it means when we talk about family of home enveloping you in a big warm hug.
And as you talk about that and actually gesture with your
I'm
hands.
actually doing it.
As you're gesturing for us, I'm actually thinking about the structure of the weeping willow and how that willow envelops you and takes you into its world and under its canopy and into that protection.
And isn't it interesting? Like, that I can't tell you about the physical structure of that house at all. I don't have any memory of the color of the walls, what the floor is like, if it was a gabled roof, it was 2 stories. I can tell you none of that. I can tell you about the plastic furniture, about a kitchen making chopped liver, and about a weeping willow tree covering me in its branches. And that's it. And that's enough for it to evoke home.
Beautiful.
Isn't that amazing?
What about your memory from your Japanese grandma?
So my Japanese grandmother is totally different sort of relationship, and we didn't spend as much time. It was more of a visiting, going backwards and forwards, and we went over a few times. And they lived in a much different situation, much more different situation. And they were much poorer, and so they lived in the house where my mother grew up, and she was born possibly in that house. And they lived in Okazaki City, so the major city that you might know is Nagoya nearby. And I remember very clearly their house was, I would consider to be super old-fashioned. And if I walked down the street, I would hit rice paddies. Wow. So it felt like it was so far away from anything. But what I do remember about this house was that it felt very traditional. And whether or not it was or wasn't, I can't tell you at the time now. But there was tatami mats, so those mats that you have on the floor. So and we would put away bedding all the time. So there was very traditional in that sense. But because my grandparents were so poor, many years ago, when my mother's brothers and sisters were mucking around in that house, someone fell through the floor. And so even when I was going to visit them, there was this perfect tatami mat square hole in the floor. And they kept it there, never repaired it. I don't know why, but they never repaired it, but they kept this hole in the floor. And so we always had to walk around it. And I remember this one room, no one could use it, but we would just walk around this hole in the floor. And it felt almost foreboding to me. And also because there's this language barrier where I'm not fluent in Japanese, good enough, but not fluent, there was this situation where things felt slightly inaccessible. It felt old-fashioned. It felt almost insurmountable. And then there's this hole in the floor. So there are these series of barriers. And it was, things had to be put away. You had to take your shoes off. You had to put away the bedding. And there was ritual and there was tradition in a different sort of way. And it felt somehow less accessible. And that for me was also another way of trying to, it felt something that was someone else's, something else, that you would put it in that cupboard and you would walk away, you would forget about it, and then maybe next year you'd come to visit it again.
Wow.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it?
Two very, very strong symbols. And contrasting your thoughts really of that willow and that hole in the ground.
And the hole in the ground. And, you know, when I think about it now, you know, because I don't think about that a lot, obviously. But when I think about it now, when I think about what I'm doing and how all the things I've done since, if I were to drag it all back, those memories they do say a lot. Really,
they do. Yeah. That's why I asked this question. Do you see the thread already?
I see what you're doing.
You see me? Thank you, Noe.
I see what you're doing. That's so good.
Can you spill for us? Spill the tea. Tell us what's going on. Where does that thread take you?
So the thread takes me to, I guess, I mean, one of the things that I find so interesting is about how we deal with identity and culture. How do we deal with it in our practice? You know, how do we deal with it in our art practice, in our design practice, in the way that we look at our cities, in the way that you acknowledge country, like in all the things that we do, where it comes from our soul and our being. And so when I look at for myself, I'm a migrant to this country from two migrant parents who have their own issues and histories of identity, culture, race, and trauma. And so how do I embody that into my storytelling, my design, but not only that, my interpretation of your storytelling and your design. And I think that's what's really important for us all.
So true.
Yeah.
I won't race ahead then too far. I'm curious as to where creative practice and perhaps were you creative as a child before considering architecture school?
You know, it's really interesting. I mean, I think all of us are. Like, I think it's interesting. I mean, I've got my own kids now, and all children that I have seen coming past myself, there's this element of creativity that just is life. Before we ask them to stop being so creative and knuckling down, let's be more serious, stop mucking around, stop using your imagination. I do it. I ask my kids to do that as well because we want them to be serious. But when we're in that most freedom of spaces, I think I, as like every child, had this opportunity to be really free and creative thinking. And I was lucky enough in my parents that they sort of, I won't say appreciated, but they permitted it.
Yes.
I mean, I do remember one of the early memories of when I was just storytelling all the time. And I did love to just talk and tell a good story. And my dad once said to me, "Oh, well, let me tell you a story. Let me tell you about the man who invented belly button lint." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And I would have been about maybe, I'm going to say 6, because I would have been like in the equivalent of maybe not high school. So I would have been like maybe 7 years old or something, right? And What do you mean? He goes, oh, you know when your belly button's a bit dirty and there might be a little fluff in there? And I'm like, okay. Well, a man named Robert E. Lee invented belly button lint. And he pulls out from his jacket pocket this roller / brush thing. And he goes, and this is what he invented to clean it. And I'm like, no. Oh, he did. Now, remember, this is before Wikipedia. This is before Google, okay? So I'm like, no, he did. So I can I have that? Can I take it to show and tell? Yes. So I take that to school. I tell everyone at school that Robert E. Lee invented belly button lint, and this is the inventor to clean it. And they're like, oh, wow, you are so cool, obviously. And then I tell the principal of the primary school that my dad has told me this. And he's like, don't be ridiculous. That's not true. I said, no, Dad said it's true. He goes, okay, it must be true then. All right. So my dad has helped me tell all these stories all the time. And I wrote it. I wrote this story as a short story and as if it was fact. And it got published in a short story collection when I was really young.
Amazing.
But I thought it was true. And it was only when I was much older that I realized it was it was published as a short story fiction. I thought I was publishing fact for like a encyclopedia entry. I was so convinced this whole thing was true.
So even though your dad doesn't remember that tree, he was still protecting the magical world around him.
Totally protecting the whole thing. And so I think this whole idea of being able to tell these stories and work out, being able to tell a story and tell all these things is really important to be able to, foster and create and to make those sort of dreams continually happen around us, because otherwise you're sort of not learning to make sense of these little quirky things around you in the world.
Yes.
And I was lucky to be able to have parents who were able to support that.
It's also the great challenge of an artist and any creative to stay in that childhood joy and
Yes.
to channel that creativity and that naivety before any things got projected on it,
And we have to protect it. I'm sure you feel the same. Like, how do you protect that in both the practice that you're doing, which has real meaning and has real rules and regulations, and with all respect, the boring stuff,
yes.
right? There's footpath legislations and all the regulations you have to adhere to.
The building code.
That thing, right? But then on top of all of that, it's the real heart and soul that you're actually wanting to get right. It's that feeling of being cuddled by the tree. It's that sense of foreboding that you may need to foster to create the understanding that there is something you need to be aware of here. It's those subtle points of language and storytelling that good design should give us, right? And that public space and that private space.
Completely.
And that's storytelling, right?
It is. It's storytelling through form, through building, through materials, through experience, through space.
Exactly. And if we don't practice that or teach that to our students or to the people around us in all the different ways that we can tell it or learn to hear it, how do we do that as practitioners?
Completely. I'm really curious about your past life at architecture school and whether they taught you some of those narrative design concepts.
Okay, the short answer is no. But the long answer, it was the best general degree I've ever done.
Yes.
And I think that architecture degree is probably, I would say when I was going through it, the best liberal arts degree that there was on offer here.
Truly, it's the mother of all arts. Completely foundational.
Why don't more people do it that way?
History, art, design,
Tick.
graphic design,
Tick.
communication.
Tick.
Did I miss any skills?
Public presentation.
Yes.
Deportment. Dare I be so old-fashioned, but you have to learn how to present yourself,
Completely.
talk to people, rationalize, argue,
Yes.
put a point across.
And understand the micro and the macro ideas of the conversation you're having and the concept and what does this mean for us in our community, in our civilization, in our culture.
And dare I say, have difficult conversations.
Yes.
And learn how to argue effectively. That's one of the things that I will have to say that architecture gave me. You can, and I'm sure you're exactly the same, can argue anything effectively.
And respectfully.
And respectfully, touche. That's the most important thing. And it's a skill that I feel that we lose as we lose the more traditional liberal arts coursework in our high schools, or in terms of the largesse of what used to be our normal arts degrees.
Yes.
And so architecture, for me anyway, was exactly all the things that you named. It was the best history degree. It was the best theory of design degree. It was the best English degree. It was the best way of understanding design, of space, of color, of music. You know, it was the most wonderful way of socializing. It was all of those things, and then you could still work out, what do I want to do when I grow up?
Exactly. There's one more thing we missed in that whole list, lest we take it for granted, and that's critical thinking.
Oh my goodness.
The number one most important tool in architecture
The
school that
most.
gets honed, but all the best schools actually look for critical thinking and creativity in the student cohort that they recruit into first year.
How could we forget that? That is the most important. We should run an ad because that is actually the most important thing. Critical thinking is one of the things that is actually, when you look at all those crazy memes that come out about the careers of the future, the critical thinking one is the one that's always needed going forward. It is, look, it's a long degree just to get that, but it's so important. It is such an important part of what architecture degrees give you. And if anyone were ever thinking, I've got kids, my eldest child is doing year 12 right now. And honestly, I say, he's interested in film, not at all architecture. But I do say, if there's a part of you that's interested in design or critical or theory of design, architecture is an excellent degree to do.
Truly.
It just gives you all those things. And I don't regret a moment of it.
What's the number one biggest lesson from architecture school that is still with you to this day and you use professionally, regularly, all the time?
You know, I think you've nailed it with the critical thinking, which I didn't even think about in terms of all the list because it was so inherent in everything.
Truly,
we did.
yeah.
100%. I still use that. Also, it's the ability to look across discipline. One of the greatest things I got out of my architecture degree was the respect and the understanding of the cross-disciplinarian nature of what architecture truly is. If architecture just looks at buildings, you're not going to get very far. No. But if architects and architectural learning understands how we all interconnect, and I'm talking about sociology, psychology, history, and the entire built environment, as well as theory, film, arts, fine arts, the whole thinking realm.
Politics, law,
business, finance.
Yes.
Like all of it. That whole understanding that one kernel of an idea has a repercussion and an effect on everyone, all disciplines, but all people. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things I think is so important not to take for granted, but to keep refining.
Yes. I regularly feel so blessed and so grateful for my architectural training and that education, that foundation.
Was it the same for you? Do you find that sort of...
Once the aha penny dropped, right? Once you have that aha moment when the students actually, you figure out what architecture school's about, what they're asking from you, what the point of all this is, why you're here, and then you realize what's going on. And that's kind of the process that happens in undergrad. And then you're overcome with gratitude. And then through your masters, you are soaking it all in, you're accelerating, you're working, you're getting experience, and you're out there and you're on the pathway to registration. And it's a long journey. It's a minimum 7 years. Yeah. But that's the cost of having the privilege of bringing something into existence that wasn't real before.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's even the thinking process. Like even if you weren't to go all the way through and become the architect, I never registered as an architect, for example. I did the entire degree. But then I segued into something else. But the same process as you, I don't have any regrets.
Yes.
Because of that thinking process.
Yes.
And I think that's what makes it incredible.
Yes.
And I think people can't underestimate what we're missing out by not having more degrees that exploit and expose us to that.
You're a very brave person and you're particularly not afraid of change and shifts. What's your advice to listeners who maybe see a change in them for themselves on the horizon, or they feel like they need to take one, they don't quite know what to do?
Well, you're kind to say that. I mean, I think that changes and shifts are actually super hard for everybody. I don't think I'm particularly brave or anything like that. I think there's a number of things when people need to take changes and shifts is that you know when it's right for you. You know if this is what you need to do. I know for me, I follow an interest. And I am just that personality. I am not someone who's ever, rightly or wrongly, I'm not someone who's ever followed a traditional career path. But I will find something fascinating or a person who's fascinating and I'll just go, I like that. I'm going to do that for a while. And when it no longer serves that interest, I then need to find something else to do. So that's the way my brain works. For other people, I think it's super important to understand what it serves for you and to do the things that work for yourself. Like, for example, does it make you truly happy? Are you in a position that you can afford to make that shift and that change? I was listening actually to another podcast, and in that it was about a writer, and he was talking about, he's an Australian writer, and he had set up an online magazine, and he'd been working for a number of years, and he realized after all this time, he was quite successful, he never actually published the books he wanted to publish. And he realized the reason why he was doing that was he was spending all his time helping other writers be super successful, but not himself. So what he needed to do was to come to terms with the fact that he needed to do what he needed to do for himself. So his change was a shift in the perspective. The perspective was not that I'm unhappy, but I need to make a shift so that I can do my dreams as opposed to everybody else's dreams. And one of the ways that he was looking at it was, you don't need to be 100% happy in everything that you do or 80% happy in everything that you do. But what you need to do is make it so that 20% of your work life is focused on what your goals are. And then you'll start incrementally making the shift to make it all work for you.
Huge advice.
I thought that was amazing. I'm like, yes, thank you. I'll take that.
Absolutely. And it comes back to that idea that charity begins the home.
Right.
You need to sort yourself out first.
Right.
You need to sort your home out first, and then it'll radiate, it'll reverberate, just like that universe of positive influence and positive possibility that you've described for us.
And you make sure that there's something in there that means something for what you're doing, I think, and I think all jobs are hard. There's nothing that's 100% amazing all the time, And when you look at what it is that you're doing, is just like, for me, I moved when I thought that architecture was going to be everything to me. I thought, that's my dream. This is what I want. It's the perfect mix of intellectualism and art. And, I can be a poet and create beautiful buildings, and I'm going to do that. And then I got into it and I thought, am I going to do that? Because I was doing, projects that were talking about Wuthering Heights as a discourse over the Yarra River. And people were looking at me just going, what?
The willow.
That's right. Heathcliff. As some sort of sight line. And people look at me going, what kind of building is that going to be? And I was like, I don't think so. I don't know. And all of a sudden, my segues just followed me into curatorial work. And I started putting up exhibitions at a gallery. And it was architectural exhibitions with emigre architects, and it became a modernist show. And then it moved into this, and it moved into that. And the next thing I knew, I started publishing architectural monographs, and all these sorts of things just started happening. Then it started becoming, I was so interested in Melbourne history. I started working in that sort of area. But what does it mean to have history in a place like Melbourne? Those sorts of questions about identity and culture. And you just follow these little pathways forward.
That next little domino that's
right.
taking you on that
sometimes
journey.
You don't know what that means. And then when you look back on it, I go, hang on, it was all about that willow tree and the tatami mats.
That's exactly why I asked the first question. Was it hard for you to release that architecture dream? Because I know for many students or graduates who are on the cusp of, what do I do? Do I push? Do I continue? That's really hard, and that can come with a lot of shame. And shame is one of those universal feelings that can send us down difficult roads.
That's a great question. And I think there's so many ways I answer that, because I nearly gave up within the degree, as I'm sure many, many people did.
Yeah.
Many, many people. And I took a long time in that degree, because I took a segue into a museum studies course and then a photography course. So I took an inordinate length of time. So if anyone's listening to this who's thinking about arch, don't do that. But what was also great was I wanted to give up. I was like, this is not for me. I don't know that I want to do it. But doing those other courses as a hiatus and coming back to architecture was a good break, because it gave me another perspective. The other thing was wonderful. She's now obviously very high-level professional architect with a huge international firm. She was a couple of years older than me, a couple of years ahead of me in the degree, sat me down and said, there are not enough female architects. You need to complete this degree. And I thought, that's really interesting.
Who was it? Who was she? What's her name?
Anne Lau.
Oh, wow.
Amazing. So she's an amazing architect, and she has been an incredible mentor. And she said, you need to finish this. It's incredibly important. Whatever you do with it afterwards, just finish the degree.
Yeah.
So I took that advice and I finished the degree, and but I finished the degree in a different way. So I finished the degree in where my interests started to shift. So I finished the degree more in a theory than a prac. And it because my interests were starting to shift that way forward, and it was fine.
Right. And you corrected your course, and you set sail on the next destination.
But there was a lot of fear around that, as you articulate. And there is a lot of. I also, because I went to a very sort of design-based school, and so my thinking was very design-based. So when you change the way that you are maybe against the norm or the fashion, it does feel scary.
RMIT.
I was RMIT.
Our alma mater.
Yeah, there we go.
Love RMIT.
And it's great.
But so many amazing curators and writers and theorists have also come out of that training, that discipline.
It's true. But it's also not what architecture school wants you to do.
It's not.
So it was a big shift mentally for me, but I don't feel that I was unsupported by the particular people I was asking for support from in that department. And I had some incredible people assisting me through it. And it felt the right thing to do. And it was, fantastic. I mean, there's some amazing architectural theoreticians and photographers, all that coming out of RMIT, as you say. So
from all that learning and knowledge and perspective and continued practice, what does good design mean to you?
There's so many answers there, aren't there? I mean, you know that. So, good design, it's so subjective. So good design, what does that mean?
I know everyone has a very different answer to this question, and that's why I do love occasionally bringing it up and repeating it.
It's a good one. Okay, so good design. I'm going to answer it from one particular viewpoint now.
Take as many viewpoints as you like.
Let's circle back. Okay, so let me go a little hoity-toity in my first answer,
Please
if you don't mind. Okay, good design for me, from where I'm coming from right now today, is I think that we need to look at design as more than just the physical built environment. So for me and where I'm coming, I'm sorry, this is super serious, but from where I'm coming from now, that we need to understand cultural safety and integrity within our spaces. So it's more than just the buildings and where they're sitting and the juncture between that wall and that ground. So it's not just about, hi, I'm walking up against a building, there's not enough light. That's one way of
It's
looking
not
at
just about sight and form.
Correct. And it's not just about how well lit or commissioning a sculpture in your nature strip all across.
Or worse, a mural.
Or worse, a mural. Or an uncommissioned mural, even worse, sometimes better. It's none of those particular things, but it's the actual design of space that addresses what it's like to be a woman, a child, anywhere around a binary or intersectionalities, any of those sorts of identifying aspects of us as humans, where we need to feel a sense of cultural and identity safety in our built environments.
That's so critically important, and it intersects very strongly with behavioral psychology.
Wow.
Right?
Yes.
Behavioral psychology in space, thinking about how do people think, feel, and behave in space, and how do we design for that and to support it? And how do we bring trauma-informed design into the question? Particularly so important in healthcare projects or school projects or for multicultural communities.
Or public spaces, like just general public spaces, right?
Completely.
And isn't it interesting? So, and actually I'd be so interested here because this is just, I'm thinking about this in terms of how we use sound to help coordinate space in public space. So you remember sometimes there's soundscape work down at South Bank?
Yes.
And they use sound to designate space. And in some public space works, sound is used so effectively, but that's often considered to be an art project. Surely, you would have more to say about this than me, right? But how sound can be used.
We're hugely passionate
Right.
in our practice studio Razbash at the intersection of sound, of architecture, of acoustics, of audio, and this, how it works from a sensory perspective, how it works from a craft and art perspective. It's huge. First, it comes down to comfort, right? You've got to consider that human experience in space, the behavioral elements. You've got to feel comfortable. You've got to feel good.
Yeah.
Then add that art layer, add that soundscape layer. Be creative with it. We treat sound as a material, just like light, just like air, texture, color. Sound is just another one of those things that we work with. But I see that as the next frontier.
Yeah.
We're racing ahead a little in our conversation in terms of our future outlook and thinking of the world. But if someone asked me, what are they going to teach the students at architecture school in 10 years' time? Sensory design is going to be huge. Neurodivergence is going to be huge. The kind of universal sensory comfort, light, sound, it's going to be really come up majorly.
On that, so interesting you're talking about that, right? So on that, and I know, again, sorry, racing ahead a little bit, but just because you've mentioned all that sensory use of space in design, like in design, for example, and talking about sound, and I wasn't thinking about sound the way you're talking about, which is really interesting. I was thinking about sound almost as again, like you're saying, another material, but almost like a design add-on rather than another material in its nature itself, which I like what you're talking about. Do you think going forward with the better introduction of things like AI goggles or better headphones that we could walk around with, that we'll be able to turn on and off sound as a design tool, as that next element, like you're designing for, at our will?
I love that question. And often people do go down the tech route when they start thinking about sound straight away. I think totally. Right? Where there's a way, and where there's technology, people will do it. And inevitably it's already happening. And currently in our cultural moment, there's this discourse about, do you walk around with headphones or no headphones? Do you take the plane or aeroplane with headphones or no headphones? And particularly I think the Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z are really getting, whatever the alphabet generation is of the young ones at the moment, are really exploring what's it like to reconnect with the world without earbuds in. So that tech component's always going to be there. But for me and our practice and how we think about sound, it's the ones that's always been there. It's the frequencies. It's how does sound bounce around in a room? How does the shape of the room affect the frequencies and the timbres and the colour and how it sounds? How does your voice, your conversation sound? How does the teacher sound? How does the lecture sound? Are you comfortable in that restaurant, or are you leaving at the end of the night screaming with a sore throat?
Yep. That's so
those
true.
basic things. And of course, the next step is the musical spaces. How does the musician sound? How's the musical space sound? How's the rehearsal room? How's the performance? How's the school hall? These are just basic physics.
Yeah.
Sound appears as a wave of frequencies, and that has a behavior. So before we even get into the whole tech front and augmenting it, I feel that we have to get sound right at the basic level.
Yeah.
Like, let's just have restaurants where we're not going home with headaches and sore throats and we're screaming all night long.
We can hear each other.
We can have a conversation.
That's it.
Exactly.
It. It's so interesting because it's so true. And that whole conversation that you've brought up about the generations walking around with earbuds, and that it's the same conversation that we have, for example, in art galleries, museums, etc. And you would have, like, for example, so many people are walking around with one or two earbuds in all the time, even if they're not listening to music, just all the time.
Even when they've come to a gallery for a show.
Even when they've come to a gallery for a show.
That's horrifying.
But is it? Or is it an opportunity, going back to what you're talking about, right?
Can you broadcast a playlist?
So you can broadcast a playlist. You can give people the opportunity to expand their experience. And again, that expansion of experience can be through a soundscape, can be through an audio narration. Again, through all the things that you would otherwise think are not materiality or not part of this experience but an added extra, suddenly become integral to it.
I love that. And it's an extra layer that you can curate and support and enhance the experience.
Exactly.
Because people are going to do what people are going to do. That earbud is going to be in one way or another if they want that earbud in. Some people focus better. Maybe that's how they pay attention to the art. That's how that they can engage with your programming.
And so therefore you give them another way of just going, I'm doing you. So if that's you, I'm going to lean into your process.
Yes.
And I think that's us, again, in the actual built architectural environment, being able to acknowledge that we therefore need to really accommodate for all of these options again. Yes. And that, again, circling right back, is part of what does good design mean, is the ability to think that 20 steps ahead. But again, going back to that earlier question, but what does architecture school give you? The opportunity to ask good questions. Because if you can't ask those questions about the what if, I mean, when I think about it really, I mean, life is just a series of, what is it called? Sorry, obviously getting old. You know when you do that whole play acting and you go, yes and? What is that kind of acting called again?
Improvisation.
Improvisation, that's right. So life is a series like improv, right? So it's literally like someone gives you a problem and you go, yes, and. And so architecture is literally improv in the hugest sense, in the biggest sense in the built environment. So you say, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? I do this, yes, and what's the next problem? You know?
And how many ideas can we pull in, and how much meaning can we pull in, and how much opportunity can we pull in, and how much complexity can we create while still making it seem cohesive and beautiful and refined and all these things that become more aesthetic that we're chasing after.
Exactly. So isn't good design then that ability to ask all those yes and questions and then come to it with a beautiful keyword sentence? So it ties it up perfectly.
The one big idea.
The one big idea. I love it.
That we're searching for in the good projects.
Yeah, that's right.
Someone asked me a few weeks ago at the end of a talk, what does good design mean to me? And when you get asked that question on the spot, just like I asked my guest, you come to it with an instinctive response.
Yeah.
And for me, what came up in that moment was actually choice. And part of this conversation in our sensory unpicking of, well, what do those earbuds mean in the art gallery? It's about choice, isn't it?
That's
and,
right.
and helping the user and someone who's coming into the building actually choose where they want to be, choose how they want to experience it. When you can create enough of those choices and enough of those opportunities, you create good design because everyone or most people will feel comfortable, welcome, and it's accessible.
You know, it's so interesting you talk about choice, and I love that actually, because I'm thinking about we as those architects, architectural trained designers, design trained artists, practitioners, writers, whatever.
All the good things.
All the so-called good things. But then you think to yourself, there is an inherent elitism, you know, in that practice, right? Like in the knowledge and the practice and the discuss. But what you're talking about is the leveling, the opportunity of choice, right? So when we think about, and if everyone thinks about, if you're a designer or you're a practitioner, and you think about what is it that makes what I do worthwhile, is I'm offering someone the opportunity to choose this, and I'm offering someone the opportunity of choice in this. So if I were to look at designs, if you think about the houses you choose to rent or buy, the objects you choose to purchase or not, there is a reason, a tangible reason why that one is better than that one. And it's the understanding of that tangibility, the understanding of that choice that you are making, as you've just articulated. That is what makes us as designers or artists or educators the ones who are truly able to speak about it, because you understand those questions and you understand what makes that choice important. And I think that is really what is important about design learning and understanding of design, and those people who can speak and articulate about design, is to be able to talk about the choices that people are making and understand why.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah. And I think we're losing a little bit of that in the conversations.
Is it those people aren't learning enough about also how to communicate ideas? You and I are huge fans of the importance of communication and good design communication and outreach and plain language in a way that's accessible for people and everyone can come together over.
Yeah.
Is that being lost a bit?
You know, I wonder if it is that, because I think definitely there is an inability to understand what it means when you ask a question, what do you like? What is good design? Why do you like these headphones? Or why do you love this beautiful mug? Like what is it about this that gives you joy, right?
Yes.
As opposed to that gives me no joy. You know, so what is it about something that is a good design piece? What is it about that couch that you've chosen over the other one? You need to learn the language of what it is that is the articulation. Are we losing it because we are in a generation of instant gratification where we're just seeing so many things we don't even know it gives us joy anymore? That's a possibility. Are we losing it because we have lost a generation plus who no longer learn history or culture or discuss these things around what it means to be design literate? That's also a possibility. Are we in a culture where there's no longer any need to sit through the boring bits to get to the good bits of a book or a movie or a TV series because everything is churned over so fast? Yeah. Another possibility.
Are we not given the opportunity to contemplate and develop our tastes because the push of marketing aren't ending through every single screen?
Yes, we're given the taste. We're being told, aren't we? So we're no
by
longer
influencers and tastemakers.
Exactly. So you no longer have the opportunity to develop your own. You're being told, and your peers are telling in a way that was never the case before. So I think there's a whole series of things that are working against people to develop that skill, to hone that, I don't know, that instinct that, we or people generations earlier, myself included, had to get wrong.
Yes.
And generations now are scared about being cancelled straight away. I had plenty of time to get cancelled before people found out I was wrong. No problem there. By the time everyone found out I was wrong, we'd moved on to something else. So there wasn't that level of stress, fear, and anxiety that, for example, my kids might have about making the wrong decision or liking the wrong thing.
And it's eternally on the permanent public record.
Like I wore something totally uncool. I'd be laughed at for months, but then it was gone and it wasn't being brought up forever. Whatever. But it's such a different landscape. So I think that there is something about this inability to have confidence in yourself or to have an opinion or to understand or ask the question about what could good design mean for me. Doesn't mean that it's right or wrong, whatever right or wrong means. It doesn't mean that it's a definitive answer. It doesn't mean it has to be the only answer that you're going to stick to forever. You can change your mind. That whole idea that what does good design mean for me now? I don't think we're asking or listening to those answers.
The eternal challenge with clients is most people can tell you what they don't like. The hard no's come up very clearly, very loudly for people, but what they do like, what they want, that is often much, much harder to access and to connect to. And such a good question is, well, what's a memory that gives you joy? What's a place that gives you joy to ask or connect into? But I want to pick up on that idea of confidence and what gives you confidence and what inspires and drives and motivates you. Is there something there?
That's great. I don't know. I don't even know what to say. I don't even know if I don't know if I do have confidence. I don't feel like I do. I think what motivates me, I can definitely say, is I love good things being done well. And I'm not I think obviously I love it if it's me doing good things well, but I love it when people around me are doing things well and doing great things. I feel like the luckiest person on the whole planet, and I can't stress this enough, that I know amazing people, yourself included, doing unbelievably incredible things. Not just average things, which would also be amazing, so don't get me wrong, but incredible things. And it gives me the word you'll know, nachas, like that feeling of overwhelming pride and joy to know that people in my milieu are achieving and accomplishing meaningful, wonderful things because they feel wonderful and joy in doing it. And it could be like the podcast, the radio show that you're doing, the works that you're creating, the friends who own these restaurants, the friends who are opening galleries, the artworks that they're putting up, the fame that they're starting to recreate, the books that they're launching, the music that they're creating, the jewelry that they're doing, the things that they're doing that are starting to get recognized by the outside world as well. That gives me such confidence and such joy and such positivity about the world that we're living in. And I think because I see the world, I don't know, it feels so shallow when I say it this way, but I see the world through joy, through design. So and it makes me very happy when I see good design being appreciated, and even happier when the good designers are the people I know.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Where does the nachas sit in your body?
Oh, it's like visceral. It's in my gut. I feel myself almost, when I talk about it, I feel myself bending over, and it looks like someone's punched me in the gut, but it's a punch of joy.
It's a good one. It's a sparkly one.
It's a sparkly one.
And how much does creative production or creative ideas actually need community to share and bounce and circulate?
I think for the things that I've participated in, the answer is yes, and a lot. Probably not the same for everybody, but the things that I have been lucky enough and I enjoy being involved in have all been around the idea of what is community, what does that mean, and how do we discuss it, share it, and make it work. So that is like, how does your public space read? Who is in that space? When we talk about cultural safety, who is safe? and who is inherently unsafe in that conversation. If we're talking about identity and politics or identity and the arts, what are we talking about? Whose community are you excluding or including in those conversations? So these sorts of things have been inherently in my discussion points. And for me, that becomes inherently about community. You have to buy in, you have to participate, you have to be part of it. And for me, that's what makes it work.
I love that.
Well, I hope other people buy into it.
I wanna talk about with the time that we have left about your current projects that you're working on and your new role. What are you able to share with us?
So I finished a manuscript.
Muzzle top.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really exciting, obviously, as everyone who writes knows as well. It's fantastic. I have that out with Key People Literary Management, who are my agents, fantastic people that they are there. Fingers crossed something happens with that. I'm working on some other work there as well. I have a short article that's coming out in an anthology book that I think will be talked about probably with yourself as well at some point. I have also been working on a couple of other smaller projects. I have a Substack that just started, keeps my writing fresh as well, which is quite hilarious.
What's your Substack title?
Gosh,
Remind me. It was pretty funny when I saw it.
It's pretty ridiculous. It's called All the Things, and it's silly and so not serious, because in it I actually review Hallmark romance movies. So takes a little bit, talks about culture and identity, but it also reviews Hallmark romance movies.
Well, there'll be layers in that, no doubt, because you do the silly serious very well. You rope us in with the cheerful and silly, and out comes the serious.
Well, it's just to have a little bit of lightness in our lives. Let's put it that way. But the new role as well comes out of all the stuff I've also been doing at the museum. So one of the things I've been working towards and I'm very interested in is how we create programs and deal with culture and identity, and how we work with people and communities, for example. And so one of the role that I have now, which I'm just brand new in, so I hope I don't get this wrong, is that I'm very privileged to be working with the research team at Monash University at the ACJC, and they have some transformative research that they're doing around social cohesion. And in that research, and particularly in the first instance around the art and culture sector and anti-Semitism in the art and culture sector, they have done a bunch of research in that area. And so what I'm interested in doing with them is to take that research and say, right, how do we use that? How do we take that research and that work and create impactful and meaningful projects, programs, and policy out of that into the real world? And how do we look at that and say, how can we therefore make these areas and these pillar areas more cohesively whole and safe for all cultures and all identities to be able to work within?
Absolutely. And so there's what that moment of something very specific,
Yeah.
when done right, becomes universal. And we've seen this happen with DDA access and accessibility. Right. Get something very necessary, very specific for a very small group of people. You do it right, it will benefit absolutely everyone.
It's like a case study. So what you have to remember is that everything starts as a case study and then we move forward. So people might remember the idea of affirmative action. Affirmative action starts with one very specific minority group, and then it escalates to hopefully allowing everyone to have a step up, that we all have the level playing field. So similar to any sort of policy, you start with a very specific case study so that therefore we can look at that across the spectrum of our cultural, multicultural society and say, right, this is a test group. Now we need to understand how we can expand this across our entire multicultural community. And that's what we're hoping to be able to do with this.
To just create a better world, really. That's what it's about.
Better and safer and more, and a world where, exactly circling right back to our education, where we have better conversations, understand how to hold complex narratives, ask the right questions, listen to people when they speak to us, create spaces that are inclusive with environments and organizations that understand how to inhabit them.
Coming back to that nachas, I have so much nachas right now and so much pride that someone with architectural training is doing that work, because so often in policy, that spatial level of how do we actually bring it down to the feet and the boots on the ground? How does it actually manifest now? Spatial politics and our behavioral psychology, how does that work? And sometimes it's that extra lens and that architectural training that will no doubt see you be doing excellent work in this space.
I hope so. I think that's a really interesting point. Like, I think you're right. It's that ability to understand how people work in space. That's a really great lens to see it through.
Where can listeners connect with your work and your podcast? What are some of the handles? And I love this conversation tonight. We've been in the world of ideas and we've been in the world of good design for much of the discussion. So we didn't really unpack all these amazing projects and side quests that you do as well. So how can listeners connect and follow through on that one?
So you can see me on Instagram. I'm at Noe Harsel, basically across everything. So you can find me there. You can also find me on Substack at Noe Harsel.
Amazing. Well, I'm mindful of the time, so I want to move towards my last question. And I'm wondering, what gives you hope?
Well, I think aside from what I was talking about, all the amazing people in my life who give me incredible amounts of hope, and really you all do, like everyone gives me so much hope out there in terms of the great design that I'm actually seeing going forward. I think for me, what gives me hope is just, I mean, I hate to be really super corny, but my kids do give me a lot of hope. They are super smart, super creative people, and they are whatever alphabet generation you want to give them. Like, I don't even understand. I get it wrong and they get mad. So whatever the cool one is, that's what they are. And they give me hope because they're creative and intelligent young people who are 100% immersed in that generation who shouldn't know anything about design, given everything that we've just been saying here today. And yet they are quite amazing and aware about things that have to do with space, identity, culture, and how it manifests in that built environment, and how they are affected by it, and how they affect others. And to be honest, that either by osmosis, because it's not all by the good design in our, as we well know, in our cities, but they really understand and can see it. So what I find encouraging and what gives me hope is that somewhere in all of this, that people and in our system, we are seeing a generation that does want to engage.
And this is going to be the generation that's going to control the machines.
That's it.
Because sometimes, we like it or not, AI is coming.
Yeah.
On some level, and some people are going to have to be the ones who prompt it.
That's right. And I think there are people in this generation who, what I am seeing, and maybe I'm very lucky with my particular cohort that I'm witnessing, but they are loving good design. There's something about them that's going back to what they call the olden days, which happened to be my generation. Like
no, stop
90s.
it. We're not the olden days. No.
You're not. I am. But they're definitely going back to that, to researching, earlier design, which I think is incredible. They're doing it off their own bat. That they are seeking out clothing design because it happens to be their interest area, or film design because that's their interest area, whatever it is. But they're deep diving because they're appreciating that the algorithm isn't giving them what they need.
They want more, they want better, and now they have a healthy skepticism to what's being fed at them.
Correct. That gives me hope. They're not just being fed by the machine, they are feeding the machine.
And that skepticism may be all our antidotes.
I think so. I think it's going to help us because that is where good design comes from, right?
Completely.
You have to ask the question.
Critical thinking.
Critical thinking.
We're back in that perfect full circle, back under the willow tree.
Always. Back under the willow tree, you and me having a cup of tea and critically thinking.
Thank you so much, Noe. It's been a pleasure having you on the program.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of radio architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karim studio on Bunurong country. You can replay the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
Hey everyone, it's Queenie and you're listening to Radio Karim, People and Stories.